Welcome back to the Baseball Odds Watch podcast. This is essentially our first kind of off-season hot stove edition of the podcast. There's a Christmas tree behind me. I mean, it's a little different, but we're here. We're live. We've got things to talk about. The World Series came and went. The season came and went. And we're now in the rumor mill. We're in the hot stove. We're a week away from the winter meetings where a lot of the free agents that are still free agents, because we've seen a lot of early signings, which we're going to talk about some of them. We've seen a lot of guys come off the board already. And I'm sure there's a little PTSD from last year, right? And what went wrong with some players, not signing anything until very late into free agency and pretty much into the beginning of the season. So I think some guys are just trying to avoid that and are signing early. And I respect it. So let's take a look at the biggest name in free agency right now, which is still Juan Soto. I think coming into this offseason, we all knew it was going to be the Juan Soto sweepstakes. And it sort of hasn't been, right? Like, I thought there would be a lot more teams in the mix for Juan Soto. I thought there'd be a lot more teams making offers and having meetings with Juan Soto. And that hasn't been the case. We know the Blue Jays are in on it. We know the Blue Jays are in on Juan Soto. We know the Mets are in on Juan Soto. We know the Yankees are in the Juan Soto. We know the Yankees are in on Juan Soto. We know the Dodgers are in on Juan Soto. But something in my core, in my heart of hearts, is telling me that Juan Soto is going to be a Boston Red Sox. Here's why. The Boston Red Sox may not outbid a team like the New York Mets. They may not even outbid the New York Yankees. But the Boston Red Sox have invested in their future and are poised to win a World Series at some point in the near future. They extended Brian Bayo for a long time. They extended Rafael Devers for a long time. They've got Jarren Duran for a while. And these are really good players. On top of the Boston Red Sox, I think above any other team, have the best legacy of Dominican greatness. And if Juan Soto, I think, in his mind wants to solidify himself as a Hall of Famer, as a Dominican baseball player, as one of the greatest Dominican players of all time, I think he knows that he has to do that in Boston, where Manny Ramirez won a championship, where David Ortiz won a championship, where Pedro Martinez won a championship, where Willie Pena won a championship. I think he knows this, right? And now David Ortiz just bought into the organization. So I think that adds to that legacy. They also have not only do they have one of the best managers in baseball in Alex Cora, they extended him. And that's not something you hear about a lot, especially midseason, but the Red Sox made a decision last year and said, we're going to invest in our future. And for a guy that's only in his 20s, it's got a lot of baseball left like Juan Soto, I think that's a major thing. And then on top of that, the Red Sox will be Juan Soto's team. There's no doubt about that. That's not going to be Rafael Devers' team. That'll be Juan Soto's team. If he signs in LA, that's Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts' team. If he signs with New York, he's on Aaron Judge's team. If he signs with the other New York team, he's on Francisco Lindor's team and potentially Pete Alonso's team. Toronto, he might be on Vladdy's team. It might be his team, but I doubt it. Signing with the Red Sox, that becomes Juan Soto's team. And I think that above the money, obviously he's going to get paid. I don't think that the pay is as heavy at this point in negotiations because he knows what the baseline is. He knows what he's going to be making. And we've seen other players turn down other contracts because other reasons, right? And those contracts offered more money. So I do think there's a solid chance here that Juan Soto plays in Boston for the next 10 or so years. I really do. The other thing is, Blake Snell just signed a 5-year deal with the Dodgers, right? And so, what does that have to do with Juan Soto? I think it has everything to do with not only Juan Soto, but every other free agent, because we already saw this dominant Dodger team, right, win a World Series. And if you're Juan Soto, who's already won a World Series with the Nationals, with a team that many people didn't think was going to get the job done, I don't think you want to go to the team that just beat you in 5 games. And I don't think you want to go to a team that's as stacked as the Dodgers. You don't want to sign this giant contract and then have to play for your starting role. I don't think that Juan Soto goes to the Dodgers. I do think he'll listen to them, but there's so much money invested in that team that's not real money. It's kind of paper money at this point. That I just don't see that happening. I don't see Juan Soto's character allowing him to sign with the LA Dodgers. But I do think Blake Snell signing with that team changes things for pretty much all the free agents, because do you now want to win an easy championship? If so, then you sign with the LA Dodgers and you take that money, whatever the deferred money is going to be, and you take your championships and walk. And you wonder what your legacy will be. But if not, then I think you hear out other teams, especially on the West Coast. Now, as far as Blake Snell goes, I'm not necessarily surprised he signed with the Dodgers. I'm not surprised that he signed with the Dodgers. My thing with Blake Snell is not that I don't think he's looking at the Dodgers as an easy championship. I think Blake Snell wants a championship above most things. But I also think this season specifically, he just didn't want to play the waiting game. Because what more did he have to do to get a big contract last season? Right? He was the reigning Cy Young winner last offseason and had to wait until right before the season started to get a contract with the Giants. So now this year, the Dodgers jump at him. They say, here's 50 mil guaranteed, right? As a signing bonus, we're going to give it to you. 52 million off your contract. The rest will be deferred, but we're going to give this to you now, and we want to sign you now. After last year, you waited forever and just ended up with the Giants. It makes sense that he ended up signing that contract. Of course, he's going to take pretty much the first good offer he sees. He doesn't want to play that game again. Where did it get him last year? Now he's on a team that could potentially win him a World Series. He's on a team that could potentially win him a World Series and doesn't have to wait through free agency to see what happens with other players and other teams. It only makes sense. It does change the landscape, though, of free agency. Because now I think only teams that are contenders have a real shot at signing big names. And this whole deferred money thing, it's so weird. Where did this come from? How did the Dodgers find this loophole that nobody else was doing? I mean, yeah, we know other players have had deferred money in their contracts, sure, but to this extent is something we've never seen before. And they're building a dynasty off of it. I don't know if you hate to see it or you love to see it, but moving on, the team that I think is the biggest threat to the Dodgers right now is actually the Baltimore Orioles, but they need to do a couple of things. One, sign at least one of these big name pitchers, maybe re-sign Corbin Burns. I think that's the move. If Blake Snell were still a free agent, I would have said him, but he's not. So now it's Corbin Burns. It's got to be Corbin Burns or Jack Flaherty, right? And you've already had them both on your team, right? Jack Flaherty, you got him the year before. Last season, you got Corbin Burns. Who do you want? You got to pick one and you got to go with him. And then the other thing is make the trade for Garrett Crochet. You have to trade Jackson Holiday if you're the Baltimore Orioles, right? Sign Corbin Burns. Maybe you even sign Roki Sasaki. But I think the biggest thing you need to do that's available to you as things stand, trade Jackson Holiday. Trade Jackson Holiday for Garrett Crochet. Jackson Holiday's the biggest prospect right now with trade value that you can get rid of. Your infield is crowded, overcrowded. Gunnar, Jorge Mateo, Gunnar, Jorge Mateo, Gunnar, Jorge Mateo, Corby, Gunnar, Jorge Mateo. God, what is with my English right now? Gunnar Henderson, Jorge Mateo, Colby Mayo, Ryan O'Hearn, Emmanuel Rivera, Jordan Westburg. All these guys can play second base and shortstop and third base. So unless you plan on making him your first baseman, which we know you don't because you've got Mountcastle and O'Hearn platooning, you've got to trade him. Who better to trade for than one of the best pitchers from last season who's still coming into his own? And then you sign one. And then you become the biggest threat in the American League because you still got Gunnar Henderson, Jorge Mateo, Ryan O'Hearn, Adley Rutschman, and your outfield, right? And maybe you re-sign Anthony Santander and round it all up. But that's how the Orioles can become the scariest team in baseball. Let's move on to the awards. Because you guys are still talking about them. There are people that are still mad about some. So let's talk about them, right? Let's start at Cy Young. I don't think there were any surprises at the pitching awards. Tarek Skubal getting the American League Cy Young. What a year he had. Pretty much pitched the Tigers into the playoffs. Same thing can be said about the NL Cy Young winner in Chris Sale. Both of these guys, put the teams on their backs every time they pitched and pitched their teams, willed their teams into the playoffs. It was fun to watch. Tarek, who's coming off a second Tommy John, I believe. Chris Sale, who's old man Chris, and everyone just was like, why did the Braves even do that? It's just a rotation fill signing, and he ended up being the ace. Rookie of the Year awards. American League Rookie of the Year went to Luis Gil. I don't think there was a surprise. I think maybe an argument was there to be made for Colton Cowser, but I don't think any American League rookie had the year he had, right? National League Rookie of the Year went to Paul Skeens, though. I was a little surprised. I'll tell you why in a second. We're going to move on for a second. We're going to come back to that. American League Manager of the Year went to Stephen Vogt. No surprise there. And then NL went to Pat Murphy, I guess. And then we could go through all the Gold Gloves and Silver Sluggers, but that's just way too much to do now. The reason I was a little surprised Paul Skeens was the Rookie of the Year is because, well, the argument for Francisco Lindor, right? We're going to American League MVP went to Aaron Judge. National League MVP went to Shohei Ohtani. Right? Where National League MVP went to Shohei Ohtani. American League MVP went to Aaron Judge. But the National League MVP was the one that everyone was upset about. Right? Because the argument was, well, the Dodgers would have won just fine without Shohei Ohtani, where the Mets are nothing without Francisco Lindor. And you're not wrong. However, if that's your argument, then the American League MVP is not Aaron Judge. The American League MVP is Bobby Witt Jr. because that team doesn't do anything without Bobby Witt Jr. There's no way the Kansas City Royals clinch a wild card spot without Bobby Witt Jr. And if you want to open it up beyond that, I don't think that the Padres make the playoffs without Jackson Merrill, where the Pirates, sure, they got Paul Skeens and he did great, but where did the Pittsburgh Pirates end up going? So if you want to take the definition of MVP and make the semantics argument, then sure, Lindor's your NL MVP, but also Bobby Witt Jr. is your American League MVP. And I think once you put it in that context, all of a sudden everyone's like, well, wait a minute. Well, you can't. So then we flip it and we go to what it really is in this day and age, which is the guy who had the most amazing season ever. And yeah, your National League MVP is Shohei Ohtani, and your American League MVP is Aaron Judge. So let's put that conversation to bed. Now, free agency, right? We talked about it a little bit already, but there are some guys out there, bigger names. There are some guys that are kind of mid-level names, moves being made. I mean, Frankie Montas just got signed by the Mets. Bit of a surprise there. I don't think that signing takes them out of the running for anybody. I do think that they should make a play for Sean Manaea again. But some of the names that I'm looking at, I have an idea, right? We already said it. Juan Soto, something in my body's telling me he's going to be a Boston Red Sox. Christian Walker, I think, ends up a New York Yankee. I think the Yankees will miss out on Juan Soto. They'll need to make a move. It won't be Pete Alonso. It'll be Christian Walker. They will play the smartest guys in the room card, and they'll get Christian Walker. So Pete Alonso, I think, again, depending on what happens with Juan Soto, if he does end up in Boston or Toronto or LA or anywhere but the Mets, Pete Alonso becomes a Met. I think the second the Mets ink Juan Soto, though, if that happens, Pete Alonso becomes a huge question mark. Willy Adames, I think, is the biggest shortstop on the market. Had a great year last year coming into free agency. I think he stays right where he is. I don't think Milwaukee will be, let's say, dumb enough to let Willy Adames walk. I think they're going to let him test it, see what his value is, and then match or go just above and keep Willy Adames. Teoscar Hernandez had a great year, had a great postseason. I mean, granted, he had an insane amount of insurance in his lineup. I think he goes back to the Mariners because the Mariners saw exactly how far their pitching was going to get them, and it was nowhere. They had the best rotation in baseball, and they couldn't get anything done. They couldn't clinch a playoff spot. They couldn't clinch a wild card spot. They barely won games toward the end of the season. They tried supplementing by trading for Justin Turner and Randy Rosarena, and it just didn't do it. But Anthony Santander, or I'm sorry, Teoscar Hernandez on that roster again, I think changes things a bit for Seattle. So I think that should be their priority is hitting, and I think that there's really only one other guy that they could look at and say as a hitter is what they need, and it's Pete Alonso. I just don't think that happens. Well, two other guys, because there's also Anthony Santander. And I think Anthony Santander goes to the Blue Jays. I think he stays in the American League East, but I don't think that the Blue Jays get Juan Soto and they're going to go after a power hitting outfielder, and it's going to be Anthony Santander. There's not a lot in that specifically. Maybe Tyler O'Neill, but I think Tyler O'Neill just had this really good year, and it's kind of it. And then I think the rest, it's Jack Flaherty is the next biggest pitcher available besides Corbin Burns. And I think they kind of make a weird swap here. I think Corbin Burns is going to go to Detroit, where Jack Flaherty just left to go to LA. And then I think Jack Flaherty goes to San Diego. Here's my thinking in this, and I'm basing this totally off of gut, brain, and whatever else, pretty much nothingness. Detroit needs to add an ace type arm. Maybe not ace, but at least a two guy in the rotation. I think the biggest one you can add right now is Corbin Burns, because I think that the league is looking at Corbin Burns as this one, and he's really a two. He's a solid two. And the same goes for Flaherty, but you just traded him away. And he's a West Coast guy. He just got a taste of playing on the West Coast as a pro. I think it's going to be way more expensive to bring him back to Detroit. Now, Corbin has played in Milwaukee, and he loved it there. So Detroit is the next closest thing available to him, and I think that's what happens. Now, the rumor is that he's probably going to end up a San Francisco Giant, but I don't think the Giants are going to end up with anybody, and I'm going to tell you guys why in a minute. Jack Flaherty goes to the Padres. And I think it's because he's going to want to stay in the West Coast. I think that LA is not in on him. They just signed Snell. I think that team is kind of full unless they can get Juan Soto, and then guys are going to get traded. But I think LA is pretty much closed to Flaherty. They got what they needed out of him, and then he's done. And he's going to go to San Diego because they're going to make him an offer. They saw what he can do in the playoffs. He did it to them. They're going to make him an offer. He's not going to refuse it. He's not going to refuse it. I know he had that little run-in with Manny Machado during the playoffs, but I don't think that's a major enough reason to where he's not going to sign. I think he signs. I think he signs, and I think he signs in San Diego. Now, as far as San Francisco goes, and I'm going to close out this episode with this because this is kind of just a hot stove, update, right? Actually, before that, I'm going to say where I think Roki Sasaki goes. I think he's going to go to the Cubs. I think Roki Sasaki goes and plays with Shota because I'm sure he wants to play with a fellow Japanese star. I don't think LA is going to be in on him. I think his agent already cleared that up. But who's the next team with a big star? Japanese-born star? Chicago. Shota. And Chicago's going to be in on him. And I think Imanaga convinces Roki Sasaki, and that's going to be dirty. And then they're going to go play in Tokyo to start this season, and that's going to be beautiful. Now, as far as the Giants goes, I'm going to close out the episode with this. I think the Giants have cursed themselves. This is the most superstitious sport that exists is baseball. Brandon Crawford the other day announced that he's done. He retired. One of the best shortstops to ever play the game. Now, here's the thing. Brandon Crawford retired as a St. Louis Cardinal. That doesn't sit right with me. It shouldn't sit right with any baseball fan. Brandon Crawford played 12 seasons as the San Francisco Giants shortstop. He holds the record for most starts as the San Francisco Giants shortstop. In that time, he was a 3-time All-Star. He won 2 World Series with them, 4 Gold Gloves, and was the World Baseball Classic Championship with Team USA, and was a World Baseball Classic champion with Team USA, and he's from the Bay Area. There's nobody that wanted to retire a San Francisco Giant in recent years more than Brandon Crawford. And you made him retire a Cardinal. Why? San Francisco. Why? Don't look at free agency and the league and wonder why nobody is signing with you. And what makes it worse is now Buster Posey works in the Giants front office. He was Brandon Crawford's teammate, and you won't even give him a 1-day contract to retire as a Giant? Buster, San Francisco Giants organization, do the right thing. Do right by Brandon Crawford, or you will live with the curse of Brandon Crawford. I'm just saying. That's your episode for this week. Not much again. I just wanted to get on here and talk to you guys a little bit about what I think is happening. It's just became December. Winter meetings next week, so we'll probably pick this up again sometime during the winter meetings. See you guys soon.